T-minus 3, 2, 1, 0.
Hello, friends. Welcome back to another week. We've got a launch sequence podcast here ready to talk some space games with you, and we're back to Star Citizen. 3.24 is in the PTU, finally. We've got some interesting news coming from Pyro development for 4.0, but ultimately, as always, people are trying out the game and getting into it fresh. So today we're going to talk a little bit about new player experience, how you're going to progress in the game via ships, components, whatever it might be, and how the things they're adding with Pyro and 4.0 might fit into that. And I've got the professor here, Durgan, host of University of Stanton. Thank you for joining me today. How you doing?
Doing well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
So you are the certified professor, from what I've seen in the community. You've got, I think, a fantastic little channel going on with some good new player guides, some ship guides, component stuff, and I really wanted to get you in here because you have a lot of good things to say, and I think this is going to be something that a lot of people want to hear about. How did you end up getting into the YouTube, though, the YouTube scene for Star Citizen?
Well, it started actually a couple of years ago. I kind of was sitting back and just looking at life in general, deciding what am I doing with my time, what do I want to accomplish, and things like that. And one thing that has always followed me through gaming, through just about anything I've ever done, is that I take very well to teaching, to kind of explaining, breaking down a concept for someone in a way that they're going to be able to understand it. That's always come very naturally to me. I've done training programs in other games, Star Wars Galaxies, a little bit in Eve. Anytime that I've had friends that were joining in on a game late, I was, always the one, figuring out a way to explain to them how to get caught up. And so I sat down and was like, it looks like there's a niche for this in a game like Star Citizen, which is incredibly complex, incredibly underdocumented, and always changing.
Oh, yeah.
And there's always going to be room for people to there's always going to be room to teach people who need to learn the game because they want to play and they want to get more out of it. So I think that was kind of where it came from. And I started changing things up a little bit that year. I actually went and got my CrossFit level 1 certification. So I coach CrossFit and Olympic lifting a little bit on the side. That was one thing that I wanted to get into because I'd been in that community for about 10 years. And Star Citizen was the other one that came up because by that point I was deep into it. I had spent a long time with the Skunkworks organization. I was in their leadership staff. And I had recently broken out of there and formed my own org. And I was kind of looking towards the future of the game as well and saying, hey, maybe there's room to build a training program here where we teach people, get hands-on, and, through our experience, help give them a little bit better path. The YouTube channel was going to be a component of that, not the main thing, and I think that has kind of switched recently with the way that took off, and the realization that I've only got so much time available. Most people really only have so much time available, and trying to do one-on-one training is probably not going to reach as many people as I would like to, and be as useful. So what also helped, though, I think, was, I got, massive community support and support from the algorithm for whatever reason, right from the very first video that I launched. I was expecting to maybe, when we put the first video up a couple months ago, I was expecting to take months of posting multiple videos and trying to get a little bit of traction here. Because if you search for Star Citizen on YouTube, like, you'll get the big search, results that come up. And then you'll get a bunch on there that, it's 100 views, 200 views, and it's been up for 2 years. So it's very easy for videos to slip through the cracks, and I was expecting to contend with that.
Yeah.
Right out of the gate, I got a react by Salty Mike. I got a react by DG. I got word that one of the developers had seen it somehow. I guess the algorithm pitched it to them, and then they passed it on to some of their friends. The first video just absolutely blew up. And by the end of the first week, I was like, okay, there's something here. I need to lean into this. And so that kind of started a whole other chain reaction of events where I kind of reorganized my time and said, we're going to prioritize this channel and we're going to make sure that we can turn this into something really useful.
It is definitely easier to have a video out there doing the teaching than you having to go out every single time.
Oh yeah.
That's one of the things that I like about posting a video as opposed to streaming is like if you're streaming, you have to be there. You have to be online for however long you're doing the content. Whereas with YouTube, you put something out there and it lives. It allows people to benefit from it 5 years down the line. If, you know, like you said, you see videos that have 100 views from 6 years ago, that's still content that people are able to use and benefit from. So yeah, I love that kind of stuff. And I am glad to see more people who are focused on teaching, because like you said, the game is always changing and it is really hard to keep up with teaching things or putting out tutorials and making sure they're up to date. How do you foresee that going?
I think it's going to go very well. Like, it's going to be some work, but the nice thing about Star Citizen from a content creator perspective is that because it's always changing, there's always an opportunity to refresh your content and get new life out of it. Every time a major patch comes out where there is some significant change to a certain system, that's the opportunity to get a new video out there and say, you know, let's you know, get completely up to date on it. Let's get the new version number on there, and hey, we've got a new video. And it's important to keep that new stuff coming, because the more that you have out there, the more people realize, you know, it's a living game. Even when it's, you know, air quotes, done, released, whatever, it's still going to be changing. The nature of games these days and game development in general is that it's very rare for there to be a finished product that just launches. All of these are living works. They're under constant development and redevelopment. So Star Citizen especially, I think, is not going to reach a finished state where you can just have one ultimate guide that you never have to change. Stuff is going to be cycling all the time.
So you kind of benefit from the fractious nature of Star Citizen's development a little bit.
Totally.
Yeah. Let's talk about, before we jump into the main topic, let's talk about kind of where you came from when it comes to games before Star Citizen. When did you start playing this game? What brought you to it? Where did you come from?
Well, I backed in 2017, and I think I was in the same place as a lot of people at that point, which was, okay, it sounds cool on paper. I like the idea that they're pitching. Let's log in and see. Oh, nothing works. Okay, I'm going to log out and try it again later.
Yeah, 2017 was that was rough. That's before 3.0. Whew.
That was it might have been. When was the 3.0?
3.0 was like
launch was.
The end of December 2017.
Oh, wow. Okay, so I really did see it before. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so I did. Yeah.
Actually 3.0, like 2.6, which was the one before 3.0, was actually pretty stable. 3.0 came in and just killed everything for a few months.
But yeah, I kind of stopped in every, 6 to 9 months or whatever, and just, checked it out. So, try and maybe spend a little bit of time binding controls. That's the problem, right? Is the cost of entry getting into it is you've got to figure out how to get your ship working. That's really one of the first biggest things new players contend with. And so you spend all this time doing that, and then you start getting out into the verse, and then everything starts going wrong because, of course, it does. Nothing works. And so, yeah, I was in that state for, several years just trying it out. But I do distinctly remember, and I'm pretty sure I have an old video on some old hard drive stashed somewhere, where it was shortly after the release where they added moons, I guess. And, like, you could actually go and fly into the atmosphere. You could land on the moon. You could land anywhere you wanted and get out of your ship and walk around. And that was what I did. I'm pretty sure it was Aberdeen, because I remember it being, like, just thick, soupy, yellowish atmosphere.
Okay,
but so I distinctly remember... Yeah, I distinctly remember warping in there, flying down, and just landing the ship down there and climbing out. And just... what Elite Dangerous called the Armstrong moment or whatever that they failed to deliver on. CIG delivered on it, and they delivered on it in that early alpha stage. And I just remember thinking, okay, this is actually going somewhere. This is something I could probably get into. And then I put it away again for a little while and let it cook some more.
Yeah, it was going somewhere, just rather slowly.
Yeah.
Would you say though, going down and flying down to a planet or a moon or something like that is still a novel experience? Do you feel like other games have kind of caught up to that, or is that still something that really stands out with Star Citizen?
I think it does stand out with Star Citizen, and I'll tell you why. It's tell me how many other games you can actually do that in. You've got No Man's Sky, which it kind of, I don't know. To me, it's a little janky there, because like it basically does that whole thing for you. Star Citizen, you actually control your ship, and it feels very different to what No Man's Sky delivers. Elite Dangerous tried. the the Yamix videos always get me when he talks about that. He's just like, you just pop into existence outside the ship. Those are really the only ones that come to mind that really have that something akin to that experience. And Star Citizen's the one that I think has done it best. I haven't really seen it somewhere else, let alone in a massive online multiplayer game that has really even attempted it.
Yeah, No Man's Sky is... The one thing I like about No Man's Sky version is how easy it is. Like, I can see a planet and basically be on the surface of that planet within like 30 to 40 seconds, which is nice for, you know, when I want to move quickly. But you do lose a big sense of the scale when all of the planets feel super close. You can see all of them everywhere, wherever you are in the system. You could just turn around and see all the planets, fly there in 30 seconds, and then be on the ground super quickly. Elite Dangerous model, it has also always come off a little bit janky to me because it has that like little jump where you switch to the atmospheric flight from space flight.
Yeah. It's not a loading screen.
Yeah.
But it's basically a loading screen.
Yeah,
you can tell something is off there.
Yeah, you can feel it. Star Citizen, I think they actually kind of benefit from the fact that it takes so long to get down because things very slowly fade in. You know, we all know there's pop-in with trees and lakes and stuff like that that's on the planet's surface, but you almost don't notice because you're moving so slowly, which is a gift and a curse.
The scale definitely helps it. I mean, that's what kind of ruins it in No Man's Sky for me. Is it's, you know, it's so cartoony, and you can still appreciate a cartoony game, but it's not the same. It's definitely not the same as what we see here. Yeah,
definitely a different game for a different audience. What games did you come from? Were you playing MMOs before Star Citizen?
I did. So I mean, I'm a lifelong gamer essentially. I was basically in diapers around the time of the Commodore 64 and the early IBMs, and my dad happened to have those at the time. I was really lucky coming up with kind of a computer enabled background. So, you know, started stuff early on, and around the time of the 90s when, you know, AOL was kicking off and early online services were coming on, I was starting to kind of see the potential already for like, hey, you know, you can get all these people connected all at the same time. What if there were games where you can all play together? And all that stuff started coming to fruition around that time. My first actual MMO was Star Wars Galaxies. I started that in 2003. I had some real life friends at the time that were kind of in the know on that stuff. And at the time, I was skeptical about that. I was like, oh, well, what happens when the servers go down? What if they have a data crash and they lose all your progress? It's, you know, I'm thinking in terms of like, you know, your save file at home and a disk getting corrupted. And obviously, you know, a place running an MMO is going to be have a little better data integrity than that. Except CIG, they can't figure out data integrity yet. But no, I started in Star Wars Galaxies, and that really, really set the stage for the rest of a lot of my online life. Galaxies, of course, was an MMO RPG, so everything's kind of, you know, RPG style, dice roller, you know, get your stats up kind of game on the ground. But they also had a jump to light speed, and while that had a major RPG component as well, that was a game where you actually had to fly your ship, and if you weren't good at flying your ship, the stats on your stuff really didn't matter. So that was I would say a major formative thing. The other one was EVE Online. I played that multiple times over the years since about 2005. And that showed me what a large player-driven economy in a single shard world could be like, and it's absolutely incredible. And it goes to show, you know, the fact that that game has continued to grow year after year for over 20 years now, how successful that is, how well it's studied, how well it's historied, how often you see it in the news. That is a truly special project that I think Star Citizen, when it comes to their economy and all that stuff being built out, they would be well to emulate a lot of that. I played a lot of other stuff across the years. I've spent my time in World of Warcraft, done some raids, tried any number of MMOs since, but I'd say those are the big formative ones for me that have really shaped my perspective on things.
You have a favorite?
I would probably say Star Wars Galaxies, just because of the impact that had on me, the relationships I built there. I'm still gaming with some friends from 20-something years ago that I met there originally. We had a group that was regularly meeting real life up until COVID, and you know, some of us still play stuff together now.
That's definitely one I hear come up often. We've been doing this podcast for a couple of years now, and that one comes up a lot as people's starting MMO, getting into it, and also as something that they kind of look back at as sort of the spiritual successor that Star Citizen could be to that kind of game. I think even Morphologist was saying that was something that he really enjoyed playing very early on and wanted to see this move more towards. I never got to touch it, but from everything I've seen, it sounds a lot like what we're getting with Star Citizen.
Yeah, in a lot of ways, I think it will be. Especially you look at things like the persistent hangars coming up now. That level of being able to decorate a space is something so many people, whether that was our primary game loop or not. So many others from Star Wars Galaxies love the idea of being able to take a space like that and make it our own. And it's almost shocking how many games had the room to do that over the years and didn't.
I don't think I've ever played a game where that mattered, and I've not really played an MMO before Star Citizen, so it might not matter as much in single player games, like who you're showing off to. But
oh yeah, exactly.
The idea of just being able to store your stuff and come back and look at it, like sit there and think about the stories of how you got that loot or that kind of weapon or something like that. It's unique, and it's, of course it pops up in a lot of MMOs, but I think that's a really inspiring reason to come back to a game. And I can't wait to see Star Citizen add some more unique stuff that I care about, that I can do that with. Knowing
that you have a home there. That was always something cool. Like someone with Star Wars Galaxies, you take a break from it, you come back later, as long as you've paid the rent up on the thing, so it has enough credits in there to last, your house is still going to be there. All your stuff is still going to be there.
Yep.
They use the term persistent universe here. That's what we had in a way.
Let's talk about, and we'll get to some of the cargo stuff here because I think this has some big implications, but let's talk about the new player experience with Star Citizen. Getting into this game, getting your feet, figuring out what's going on. What are your thoughts of it?
What new player experience? That's not really fair to say, because we did ask them to create some kind of new player tutorial, and they did take their time out and create a new player tutorial. Obviously, that's going to have to change now because they're changing things so fundamentally with the inventory system. Yep. But the fact that there's one in there is good, but it definitely falls short of everything you need to know as a new player, for sure. I would say, if take the right approach to this, and I understand their reasoning. Like, they wanted it to be built into the persistent universe so that when you're done with the tutorial, you're in the world. You've had no break from it. You've had no loading screen. You're in there and you're ready to play. That's a nice notion, but this game is way too complex to teach a new player everything they need to know in 30 minutes in universe, with everything in universe not quite working right. I think if it were to be redone, I think the best approach would honestly be something like what Elite Dangerous had, which, if you've ever seen that, on the main menu, they have a training section in there, and they have individual training topics from the most basic things, the steps through, controlling your ship, docking at a station, undocking from a station, getting into combat. Each one of those are separate topics that you can run individually on there. And it puts you into, a little, mini sandbox that you can do that thing in. With a game that's this wild and this complex, I think we need something like that. That's what a new player experience there should look like. Because alternatively, the answer is go look on YouTube, search for Star Citizen 3. Whatever the version number is, new player guide, and good luck.
Yep,
it's been down to the community.
Video on that update, yeah.
Which actually there will be one soon.
It is. It's pretty wild how much of that kind of stuff has been handled by the community for such a long time, from teaching to item finders to navigation tools to even like things like Bar Citizen and real life meetups. Has been just very community driven, which I think helped Star Citizen's community become as dedicated, we'll say, as it is. I mean, this game wouldn't have survived without the community, that's for sure. Besides the funding, it's impressive. But the new player experience, like you said, is pretty limited. And well, actually, going back to something you said there, so you think, what would you say to if they had modules in like Arena Commander that was all just the tutorials for the game, and then you jump into the PU and it's completely hands off? That's kind of what you're talking about?
I think that would be perfect, honestly. I can't think of a better way for him to handle it. I know that, Squadron 42 is kind of meant to be sort of that tutorial. It's supposed to kind of teach you all the fundamentals along the way. Where is it?
Yeah.
I think in the meantime, and I think, honestly, there's also the possibility that a lot of players aren't going to play Squadron 42. I know a lot of people are here originally because of that. I've got that originally on my account. I'm going to play through it, but a lot of people, they don't care about playing through a single player campaign. And the ones that are going to come straight to Star Citizen, I do think an Arena Commander module specifically with training topics would be the way to go. I think,
Yeah.
and it's probably compartmenting it that way is probably the best way for them to handle it from a development standpoint, because then they're not dealing with the complications of having to build it in a living, persistent universe where somebody could screw it up for them. They've got it, compartmented away where they can, control the environment, teach them, in a safe place.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that would be the best way to handle it.
And honestly, a lot of what they have in their new player experience right now, it really is the bare minimum basics. Like, they don't even tell you that you can change components in your ships, right?
Yeah, I don't think they do. They don't talk about the power triangle. There's a lot of functions on the ship, the open, closed doors, locked doors. I don't know. I would have to look at it again because I'm not even sure if it's updated with master modes to where you can warp anywhere. I think it literally just gets you out of the starport. I could be wrong about that, but I'd have to go back and look.
Last I checked, it was just like get up to the space station and that's it.
Yeah.
And that's a lot missing. I guess it's kind of like what you said earlier. It's about the fact that there's so much in the game that's going to change. Maybe they didn't feel like putting that in. But you recently did a video about components and
yes,
also a video about starter ships. How do you think new players should be viewing that kind of stuff? Is that something that they should be getting involved with? Or do you picture component and customization of ships being something that comes later on in the game?
Well, clearly they should have some kind of foundation in playing the game itself before they get to the point where they have to think about components. Any starter ship, any ship that you buy in there has stock components that work. That's not really an issue super early on. That's more of an issue for optimizing things a little bit later when you have a sense of what you're doing and why and how you want the ship to perform. There's not a lot we can actually change in terms of the ship's performance right now. But the room is there for them to expand and create that experience later.
What do you think are the best ways for players to jump into the game and like start making progress besides just getting more money? Like, what should they be shooting for?
Well, I guess it kind of depends on which part of the new player experience we're talking about here. If someone's just coming in fresh, just getting a feel for the game, obviously go for a new player tutorial on YouTube, start learning all the basics that they talk about, get your flight basics down, learn the power triangle, learn about the other ships that are out there where they kind of fit into the landscape of the game itself. But in terms of, are you talking about progression specifically or just learning the game?
Like just
okay.
People jump into a game and they want to make progress, right? Maybe you run a mission or two, but you want to feel like you're actually moving forward doing things.
This is an answer a lot of people are probably not going to like. Get good. Go into Arena Commander, drill. The one and only thing right now that you can grind in this game is experience and practice. It's actually getting good at the core gameplay. If you go in and you start testing yourself in Arena Commander in Free Flight, you grab a Gladius, you start dueling some players, you go into one of the Star Marine modes or Gun Rush, and you start playing that is going to start building core fundamental gameplay skills that are going to last no matter how the game changes later. Clicking ahead is always going to be clicking ahead. Getting your crosshair on Pip is always going to be getting your crosshair on Pip, even if the performance of the ships changes. And a lot of people, I understand the feeling and the mentality of, going into these modes and, you're getting constantly blasted by people who have, tons more experience than you. It's frustrating, but it's something that you kind of have to learn to create a hedge against in your own mind. Because you know that this grind that you were doing, this frustrating experience you're having is actually building skill and experience in you. If you get to the point that you're even pulling a 0.5 KDA in a Star Marine match, a bunker mission is going to be nothing to you. going deep in a UGF solo is going to be nothing to you. If you get to the point of even doing rudimentary positional combat with a Gladius in free flight against a human opponent, an ERT mission where you have to get out the range of an NPC's guns is going to be nothing to you. I don't think people give enough credit to what actually building core gameplay skills means in this game, especially ones that may have come from like an MMORPG background. In games like that, the skill aspect of gameplay doesn't really come into play as much. In Star Citizen, it's going to be crucial. That will be the major defining difference between, who's successful in this game and who isn't.
You're looking at this mainly from a combat perspective when it comes to getting into the game and improving. Do you not really see other types of gameplay being that worth it for newer players, or is that just your perspective on the game?
I think that it is worth it for understanding the place that they'll have in the game. Do I think that it's worth sitting there and grinding millions or billions of credits doing trade right now? No, because we're probably going to get wiped again. We're probably going to get wiped multiple times in the future. All of that stuff is going to go away. You're going to learn a little bit of the trade system as it exists right now at that moment, but how is it going to work out when that trade system changes a little bit? I think that the mechanical skill of being good at operating the ships is going to be far more valuable in the long run because, like I said, that's going to stick with you through a server wipe. It's certainly valuable to get in game and do these other things and enjoy them. But if you're talking about the single most important thing, I would say it comes down to mechanical skill. Now, that said, if you get in a persistent universe right now, probably the next most useful thing you could do is get reputations up, because reputations have been known to persist through some of these softer server wipes where they'll get rid of ships or they'll get rid of credits or whatever. Some of your reputations will actually come through so that you'll still have access to those higher level missions. If there's anything that's worth, grinding in game right now, I would say it would probably be that.
It's an interesting time to be talking about that because 324 just went to PTU and the idea of hauling and moving cargo does change. I do think that there is some value in knowing how to be able to pack boxes. And that sounds dumb, maybe for a lot of people who play games, but when it comes down to it, loading these ships with boxes in certain ways actually can save or make you money now. And knowing the tractor beams, the hover trolleys, and that kind of stuff, I would be interested in seeing how easy it is to get to learn that kind of stuff quickly. I really hope that Arena Commander eventually has just all of the game loops in there. If you want to launch a custom match with 10 people that just allows you to go out and mine, that'd be a really cool way to basically have a tutorial, a self-led tutorial of industrial gameplay rather than just the combat stuff.
Dude, I've seen televised competitions of logging where people will go out with chainsaws or axes or whatever, and it'll be how quickly can this person versus this person chop this tree down or cut this into, these sections. I could absolutely see something in Arena Commander like that, which is, you've got 20 crates, get them in here as quick as you can. And it's like a time trial. I would probably watch somebody play that, yeah.
Whoever's loading the C2 the fastest. Yum, yum, yum.
Yeah. No, I think that's a good point you bring up, though. That is another mechanical skill into itself that a lot of people that are good at it are going to get that stuff loaded faster and do better.
Now I want to see space logging competitions. That's the beginning of base building CIG. Just let us cut down trees on Microtech. It's one of those trees.
I was going to say that's what they're on Microtech for, right?
Yeah. Oh, also while you're at it, can we please also pick up rocks so there are less of those on the planets? I would just clear out a 5 square kilometer patch and be like, okay, org, let's go, let's do this.
Oh yeah, orgs. I mean, the ones that put on the races, I could absolutely see them doing that. They just go out there in a wide column and just comb the entire course, the entire track, and just clear it out. That'd be great. Yeah.
Going back to progression,
sure.
We talked a little bit about components, but I want to dig a little deeper into that topic because a lot of people view buying ships as progression. Do you think that CIG and we know about reputation? I actually covered that on the podcast a couple weeks ago. Can you see CIG though focusing more on components as progressing the power and personality of your ship rather than just getting new ships? Do you think it will be a deep enough system that somebody could say have a Cutlass Black and instead of upgrading to, I don't know, a Constellation, that's a pretty big upgrade. Let's say a Cutlass Black to a Freelancer Max, instead of doing that, maybe they can just make their Cutlass Black more and more personalized through components and feel like they're progressing that way instead?
This was an interesting thing in Star Wars Galaxies, actually, which was, as I said, it had more of an RPG element to the component side of the game. This is almost exactly what you're talking about, I think, where, yeah, you would get an airframe, and it would have a certain amount of mass for components that you could attach to it. And so the game in there became reverse engineering components to where they had less mass but greater performance. And then when you were equipping your ship, you could fit anything in there up to that amount of mass as long as you were supplying it with enough power. That was obviously gamified pretty heavily, and a lot of the, as far, in my opinion, how far the RPG side of that game went a little too far. But it sounds like CIG, from what I've heard about it, is actually going that route as well, where you're going to be able to customize components in some ways and accentuate certain stats over others, at maybe the expense of some others. Maybe find some out in the world that you loot or you get from high-end content that have better stats than you'd find anywhere else. I don't know if it'll be to the point that each component is a unique snowflake unto itself, or if there's just classes of components that have better stats. It sounds like they're leaning that direction, and they've certainly got the room for it. If you look at, any component on Urkel or SP Viewer, they have dozens of stats that they could vary and rebalance for, anything like that. I think it's something that could happen, but it's going to be a matter of what extent they want that to happen to. How different are those stats going to be? We're also missing a couple of key things that are preventing that from happening right now. One is power and cooling management aren't meaningful, at least not beyond the power triangle. Power triangle is separate. When I'm talking power management, I'm talking about actually getting a certain amount of power out of a power plant and having it influence other things, like, for example, the performance profile of the ship itself. There's nothing in there right now that actually changes how effective your boost is, how much acceleration you get out of your thrusters, how quickly you can rotate. There's nothing that changes the performance of the ship itself. And because everything else is flattened right now with, all the shields have the same stats, how different are the shield stats going to be between a stock component and a really high end? Are we talking 10% more shield? Are we talking doubled, tripled? Are we getting into the RPG thing of just send it up exponentially and hope for the best? It really depends on what the extent to that is, and it depends on how much those components are actually going to change the performance of the ship itself. Because that was the difference in Galaxies, is you put those components in, you put in the engine or the power plant or whatever, it changed how that ship operated entirely. And right now, the components that you put into a ship really don't change how it functions.
That is, I think, one of the least talked about, but most impactful things that they have hinted at in this game and just not gone into detail. They did the engineering talk last year, I believe it was, and they introduced us to the mechanic, the manager, I think it was, maybe, or something like that. The mechanic, the manager, and the tuner. And we know all about the mechanic and the manager. Oh, you're fixing glitches, you're changing fuses, you're at the kiosk, you're looking at the power management stuff. But they don't even touch on whatever the tuner is supposed to be. And I imagine, since the very beginning, people have always been like, oh, I want to be able to do a manual startup on my ship. I want to be the person that goes before the org, gets on the capital ship, does all the specific things in the ship to start up the systems. And maybe with a system like this, you could basically say, hey, this person knows the ship. They can start it up in a way that makes it so that the thrusters are running more efficiently, or that the heat doesn't build up as much. And that kind of idea of being able to not just change the components out on your ship, the weapons, the shield systems, all that stuff, but also being able to specifically engineer it to run in a different way than somebody else's ship is, that's huge. That seems like that could be an entirely different segment of the game on its own.
It could be, and it's one that they have to approach very carefully. This is one thing that I'm not bitter about them taking a long time to figure out, because that balancing game is going to be a nightmare.
Yeah.
When you have that many stats in play, that many different things that can be changed, there will always be a meta, and there will always be something broken that everyone figures out, and then everyone's doing the same thing. We always talk about wanting a deep game where you can configure things a certain way and customize it to what you're doing and all that, but it's very difficult to actually create that and have it play out that way in the wild.
Yeah.
So this does have to be approached very carefully, and I think that they're doing that. And it's good to me that while they're in the process of figuring out the flight model, again, uh, they've gone through and flattened most of these stats so that we're not worrying so much about, okay, how are the components affecting things. We're worried about getting the basic balance down first. They've got the room to mess with those stats later.
I think that's something that gets missed sometimes in the conversation that we have about combat right now, and that everything feels kind of samey, and they reset all these ships to certain roles, but then considering, like you said, just how much variety can be opened up if they're not only doing the component stuff, they're also doing medium, light, heavy fighters, gunships, capital ships, shield systems, and then on top of that, like, components can be changed, different size components with different power plants, power management, all these things. There are a lot of things in Star Citizen that I'm like, I'm so sorry you guys took this on your plate.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Well, cooling itself,
fun.
cooling is a huge one, and that basically doesn't exist right now. Like, you have to have a cooler. It cools down your power plant, but like, that's the only thing that happens. And one cooler is in and of itself not necessarily better than another. There's no heat per se to manage at the moment. So that's an entire system that they've got to loop in there. When it comes to components getting damaged or the ship taking damage, the entire armor system isn't in yet. We haven't seen that either. So like, all these other systems that aren't even online yet, that are going to have to come online in some capacity before they can even begin to figure out what is component balance. What is a way to make the components varied and distinct from each other in a useful but not overpowered way, when we don't even have all the systems in place that we have to consider for that whole thing. Yeah, you're right. It is a big task.
We got a ways to go, folks. But I do think that, as complicated as it is, and I think you're right. Like, it's just always going to be unbalanced. It'll never be perfect. They're always going to be having to update things every quarter or however long they're releasing updates to rebalance things and spot the metas and try and nerf that stuff. And as much as people hate the way that they nerf ships, honestly, don't buy ships when they first come out. Don't buy ships at all.
Or do, because when they first come out is the heyday. That's when they're fun.
Yeah, I mean, they're good fun, but like, you just never know where it's going to go. You have no idea what's going to happen to these ships. Look at the people who bought their combat ship 3 years ago. It's now been completely changed because of the flight model. And it's all about, you then say, okay, we'll buy a ship based on the idea of it and what it is. But even that changes sometimes. Like, the whole Ares situation was, I think, a big eye opener for a lot of people. And I say, just like, don't buy the ships for that kind of stuff. But you can really see just how much progression there could be when it comes to specifically just ships and just ship combat. We're not even talking about all the other stuff. Mining, the salvaging, the scanning. Like, they need to redo the scanning system and have scanners that detect different things. You got cargo, mass. Even the mass of the boxes you put on your ship can make a difference. VTOL, there's so much stuff. It's kind of crazy.
Yeah, the non-combat side of the game is suffering a lot of that right now.
Yeah,
I know we kind of touched on like, I'm a combat player. I do a lot of PvP, and so the combat side of the game is important to me. But like, the non-combat side should be a lot richer than it is right now. And ultimately, I think that's the fault of basically there not being an economy. Until there's an economy, it's going to be really hard to start fleshing out those other game loops and really seeing the impact that they can have. There's a lot of potential there, but I always feel like, but I don't know. I'll let you continue with that where you were going to, but we're definitely missing something right now because of that.
Well, I think a lot of people agree with you that combat has the way people talk about Star Citizen is essentially combat has taken over the game. That a lot of people are saying this has become a combat game. This is no longer a multifaceted space sim. But do you believe that? Do you believe this is like a permanent change that they've made? Like, they are just leaning more and more into combat overall for the final vision of the game, or it's just like a timely thing?
Well, I need to put a little bit of a grain of salt on that. If you look back at any promotional material for the game, what's happening in it? It's always some form of combat. This is always going to be a space combat game. I say that from a position of, maybe a little bit of favoritism because that is mainly what I do. But at the same time, combat's never going to not be a thing. That being said, there is a lot of non-combat gameplay that should be better right now as well. And I think that the reason that we're seeing such a focus on combat is that economy isn't ready. It hasn't been implemented, and so it's impossible to look at making rich, good, useful, and enjoyable non-combat game loops in the absence of an economy to support it. I think they throw combat at us, especially right now, because it's something that can keep us busy in the meantime. But it is kind of concerning that we're this far in and we still don't have the vestiges of any kind of actual economy when we've had an economy team that's been working on it for 10 years. Who's to say how far along they are with it? If it hasn't been implemented by the rest of the development team, it's impossible to know. But the fact that stuff is not there, like we're hurting for that. And non-combat game loops are hurting for the lack of the economy right now.
See, but I feel like they didn't have an economy team working on it. They had like this whole systemic services and tools, and they put prices on things, but it doesn't feel like there ever was somebody who was actually looking over the whole game, from mission payouts to the price of materials to how much it takes to refuel, and actually making sense of it, because it hasn't really made sense until, well, not yet.
It still doesn't. Yeah. And no, it's important to distinguish this too, because we have to talk about what an economy actually is. In an economy, goods are coming in and they're going out somehow. Right now, there is nothing coming into the economy. It is static. It's a facade. We have markets with commodities up that are generated from the ether. They're sold for X amount of credits, and then players pick these up and take them somewhere else and sell them for X amount of credits, and then AUEC is generated from thin air. There's nothing meaningful to any of that transaction at all. None of those resources came from anywhere. They were generated. A true economy is going to be when players and NPCs, like they're talking about with Quanta, are actually out in the world harvesting the resources from somewhere. Those resources are coming in, they're being processed at a cost. Those refined resources are being moved somewhere to be crafted into something or crafted into constituent components for something else, and then turned into a finished product that is then either consumed or lost or destroyed somehow and then has to be replaced. That's how an economy works. We don't have any point of that right now. We have kind of the little pieces that can support that when it's there. We have trading outposts and we have a refinery center, but we don't have a factory. We don't have any way to craft anything, and we don't have anything that we lose that we have to replace. So none of the components of a functional economy are in there at all, and that's what we're really missing right now. And I think they, looking back at like the Tony Z videos and the theory behind it all, and they made some nice PowerPoint slides on it. It looks like the ideas for that have been kicked around for a long time, but again, the implementation, it hasn't been, and
story of Star Citizen.
Yeah, I don't know if there's tech stuff that they're waiting on before they move that far ahead or what, but like what we're feeling with all these other game loops being unfulfilling or broken or not supported properly is directly related to that. It's because there's no economy to support it. None of the rest of the stuff can really be fleshed out and supported the way it needs to be.
Yeah.
And I do want it in there. I want it in there for everybody, even as a combat player. Like that's going to change the landscape for combat gameplay too. Where we fight and how we fight and the things that we choose to bring to the fight are going to be dictated by the economy too. I want it for us. Everybody wants it.
Now, when you say you're a combat player, are you a lawful or unlawful combat player?
Depends on the day.
I ask that because, like you said, the economy changes where we fight, and it'll be interesting to see how their simulation eventually will see trade lanes and spawn pirates in there. And I find myself wondering how many players are, a lot of people think everybody who does combat is just looking to kill innocent folks, steal your cargo, pirate your ship, whatever it might be. But there are a lot of people who are out there specifically to do bounty hunting, to track down criminals, to find the challenging fight from the people who are actually doing the fighting. And so you look at, a trade lane where a freighter ship, or not a freighter, a pirate base might set up to do a lot of interdictions, and you think, okay, it's exactly like you said. The economy changes the fact that a lot of those people who are into combat and are looking for players to fight might go to those locations because they know all the pirates are hanging out there, and they just want to protect the trade lanes. And those are the really interesting kind of knock-on effects of a working economy, and I'm glad you brought that up.
Yeah, definitely.
The other thing...
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Sorry, I totally lost it.
I also lost it. The combat portion of the game, I think, is strong, but I don't think people need to worry about the fact that that's all they care about. There's the fact that they put so much effort into this cargo system should, I think, be a sign to everybody of how much they want players to have things outside of combat to do. They want to treat the players who don't want to do anything but move boxes on and off ships. Like, how many players are there that like that? I'm sure there are plenty of you guys in the comments typing it out right now, but
oh yeah,
it's not going to be an only combat game. And even looking at the way that we're expanding, we're about to talk about things going on with Pyro, but even looking at the way we're expanding into the Pyro system, a lot of people look at that as a sign of the game changing. Oh, they're building a system that's only for combat, that's only for people who want to fight. And it is a contrast to the system that they made now, because they're trying to build out all the foundational parts of the game they want to make. They want to make a system that has large Earth-like planets with cities. They want to make a system that is a frontier, almost lawless, barren location. They want to make a system that is somewhere in between. They want to make a giant, bustling metropolis of Terra. These are still steps in the development.
Yeah, they are, and I think a lot of people kind of glazed over a little bit of this in the last ISC yesterday, which is specifically one of the guys was talking about having this open platform where you can go and easily load your whole sea, or get your cargo out of the cargo elevators and the Pyro stations, and he's talked about that process being more streamlined in Pyro than it is in Stanton. I think there's some significance to that a lot of people might have missed when they watched that video. I had to watch it again this morning, and my ears kind of perked up on that part. I think these different zones are going to treat cargo running and all the non-combat game loops a little bit differently, and there's going to be something for everybody there regardless. Yes, right now the flashy thing is the contested zones and the asteroid bases, but that little nugget in there tells me that they are considering the other game loops as well. It's just, again, we're in a point where we've got some ability to move boxes around. We don't have an economy with a reason to do it. So that's still kind of the Achilles heel of the whole thing. But I don't think that it's going unconsidered just based on what I heard there.
I also think that was like them just admitting that they know the space stations need an update to support that game. Like, I don't think they're not going to have external freight elevators in Stanton. I think they were trying to say, hey, the things that we saw with Stanton that need to be fixed, we're putting them in the stations in Pyro. Not to say Pyro is going to exclusively have that kind of cargo hauling. Yeah, and
that's possible. Yeah,
but I do think that you also have a point in that they're focusing on all of the game loops. I mean, if you want to be a very, very highly paid cargo hauler, Stanton's not going to do it. You might make some good money with certain routes in Stanton, but you're not. It's supply and demand. You're going to have so many cargo haulers in Stanton. If you want to make the good money, if you want to make the real money, you can go and run trade routes in Pyro. And that makes more gameplay for people who also want to fight, because you're going to run into trouble. People who want to fight now have an objective in Pyro besides just flying into the system and scanning for other people to fight. They get paid better because you're getting paid better at a cargo hauler, and I feel like that's also part of the economy.
Yeah, totally. And again, I think the idea of loss in the game when it comes to ships and components, and they're talking about only having one iteration or one instance, I should say, of a component that you looted somewhere and that's on your ship and it blows up and you've lost it. That's going to change a lot about how people consider combat. And they're like, yeah, you're right. Right now there's a lot of murder hobos, and I do it some days too, where it's just it's just about going in and getting reps.
Professor.
Yeah. Oh yeah, totally. No, I'm the worst. To a lot of us, right now it's just about getting in and getting reps and fighting everything that we can at every junction. Not all the time, but it's certainly true most of the time. And I think that that's going to change when there's actually something on the line, when you have specific ships and components that you need for certain tasks, and you need to have some backups of them stashed somewhere to fall back to if you lose one. When there's actually a cost to that stuff that is going to be dictated by economy, how and where people engage or choose to engage is going to be very different. It's not going to be just claim your ship and go ram it into somebody. It's, you're going to have to think this stuff through and kind of have a plan and a reason for being where you're going to be and fighting who you're going to fight. I think the cargo security thing is going to be a big one, but the value of the cargo has to change such that it's worth protecting.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think
Again,
I think it'll get there eventually, but it's just economy. It's funny because I was on Griefers Pub podcast a week before last, and their most recent thing they were talking about this as well, but it was a discussion entirely about player versus player combat, and 90% of the focus there was the need for economy. It's like across the board we see it. It is the most crucial thing that we need right now, I think.
I do think 3.24 is a bit of a preview of it, but with 4.0, and this is probably hopeful thinking, a little hopium, every update starts to make things matter more, from cargo being more physicalized and being maybe made more valuable with these new rebalances coming into the star simulation starting to kick in, to death of a spaceman at some point coming down the line. I do think that we're starting to get into an age of Star Citizen consequences actually mattering somewhat, because that's one of the biggest missing things from this game. Like you were saying earlier about the new the freight elevators that are on in outposts on planet surface and moon surfaces. These things do not give people enough consequence for possibly stepping in and trying to steal your cargo, because you are in an armistice zone. You might not be able to shoot at them right off the bat as you see them, or there might not be security turrets that are there. They're going to knock them down into the ground as soon as they start opening fire on other people. And that's a huge missing part of this game too.
It is, and a lot of that missing part is due to the fact that the servers are just not very performant yet. Like they don't support NPCs that can actually react and shoot in a timely fashion. They don't support turrets that are a real threat to ships. They can be if you sit still, but if you're moving at all, they're shooting 3 days behind you. Until that's addressed, it's hard to have security in a high security zone. And the problem is that in the meantime, even if that, let's say the security is not there, let's say you're in low security, you're in Pyro or whatever, it would be great to be able to bring the whole crew with you and have them watch your back. But if there's an armistice zone preventing anybody from shooting and taking advantage of a trespass charge or a stealing cargo charge, those charges are CS1, CS2. They're meaningless. Mm-hmm. Until your squad can actually watch your back and shoot those people when they get the aggression charge, it's pointless. And the armistice zone messes with that, big time. I think that is probably one of the single best changes with the external elevators coming with these outposts that they could make right now, is just getting rid of the armistice zones. They need to be gone. They needed to be gone a couple years ago, honestly.
Yeah. And again, it just comes back around to their back end tech, to their server meshing, to their networking, not allowing the economy, not allowing for larger scale forms of gameplay, larger player caps, for security systems and AI to work correctly. It feels like the conversation just always loops back around to the fact that server meshing hasn't allowed the game, and we hope hasn't allowed the game to run smoothly. Because gosh, it would suck if server meshing comes around, they get a couple years to make it run smooth, and then we're like, okay, time to get a quantum loading to really get this to all work. Server meshing was just the next step. Because, man, it's been a while we've been waiting for this, and I do hope that it has a significant impact on how the game runs.
Yeah, I know it's not going to be a silver bullet, at least not right out of the gate, but it better change something, man. Something's got to change.
Yep. Yeah, no kidding. Let's continue talking about ISC yesterday. It was a very interesting episode, and we got a lot more insight into Pyro and how it works. First question I have for you on that is what I think I saw a lot of people reacting to, at least in the comments on the episode itself. People are very against Pyro. not in the sense of its existence, but in the fact that they just do not believe there will ever be a reason for anybody other than griefers or gankers or whoever, whatever you want to call people, to go to that system and just fight each other. Do you believe that to be the case? Now, I want your professor answer, okay? Not your PvP answer.
Yeah. Well, this is a good one. I mean, I think there are going to be reasons for other people to go there. What they're talking about with, you know, the contested zones and, you know, them being akin to dungeons and being able to get loot out of them, like, you know, any loot and recovery shooter. And I'm sure that there's going to be, you know, static places outside of the stations as well. I mean, I think that's plenty of reason to be there. I don't think that having a reason to be there absolves you from the responsibility to have to watch your back against other players. It is a lawless zone.
Yeah.
Well, I'm sorry, I might have kind of lost part of the question there.
I'm really just... I mean,
when
you
you say they're
answered it.
against Pyro, yeah.
Like, people are basically saying, this is why I will never go to Pyro. There's no reason to go to Pyro.
Well, if that's not your game loop and that's not your style of play, then don't go to Pyro. That's why Stanton's there.
So you do think that if you go to Pyro, you will get into combat?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's a strong possibility, especially in a game where, again, going back and beating the economy drum again, if there's you know, no risk to attacking another player in a lawless zone where there's nothing preventing it, and there's the possibility of gain, then yeah, there's probably going to be combat. Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to happen regardless. Now, as far as whether that's right or not, I mean, it's a lawless zone. It's been built as a lawless zone from the beginning. That's what its purpose has always been. I think complaining about it now is just akin to, you know, I think it's just kind of a maybe a feeling of being left out a little bit when, you know, major content is finally being delivered. And
first new
you know,
system.
We've been in a drought for new content for a while. You know, stuff comes out. It's usually very small, very minimal. And for a lot of people to feel like, you know, maybe it's kind of out of their reach because their skills aren't there, their mindset isn't there, they don't want to get into combat with other players. I kind of understand the feeling of maybe being left out a little bit, but I mean, you know, when mining or trade or whatever, something like that gets added, you know, combat players don't go out complaining that, you know, oh, I don't want to do this.
I don't know.
Why is this update coming out when I don't feel like playing it?
I usually see combat players saying, "Ooh, look, more targets."
Yeah, there you go.
Okay. Let's go to that idea of it being lawless, because one of the big things that they wanted to add to the game before Pyro was reputation hostility. And we know that there are multiple gangs in Pyro who will have reputation. They'll react to you differently based on who you are. But at the same time, there's also not a comms system in Pyro that we don't really know how it'll track you doing things. Like, I don't want to call them crimes because there's not like an official legislation of the system or something, but the gangs will react to you differently if you do certain things. And that does kind of introduce the possibility that there is some form of enforcement. We just don't know how wide-reaching it is. If you kill someone in space, first of all, does that information even make it to the local gang? Second of all, how much do they gun for you after you've done that? Do they wait till you come to their space station? Do they try to track you down? How does that all work? And I think that is a big complication they haven't really talked about yet.
The unfortunate thing is that that's an area of pure speculation. We have to assume that they've seen the problems there and are going to have a way to address it. As far as how they could, obviously they're going to have to do something, because the entire concept of the comm array and how it works in the context of Pyro is there is no comm array, like you said. And because of that, that bounty system basically doesn't work. The tracking system doesn't work. That kills off the entire bounty hunting game loop. I don't think that they're willing to kill off the bounty hunting game loop for all of Pyro. I think they need to have some system by which, you know, even lawful players can come into Pyro at their own risk and try and hunt down their targets that are, you know, on the lam. It makes sense to me that that would be a thing. And so that, to me, speaks to the need to kind of fundamentally change that underlying system. I think it's probably something that's on their radar, but it's not something that they've talked about. So anything we come up with could be speculation right now, but I think that there's room for that, and I would like to see it. Honestly, I think that even in Pyro, you should be at risk of people coming after you because you've got a bounty in another system, or because you've run afoul of one of these gangs. I hope it's coming, but I don't know how they're planning to address it.
It's yet another one of those systems that's probably waiting for server meshing or something.
Oh God, yep.
When it comes to those contested zones we were talking about, they talked about exclusive loot, reasons to go there. Do you think that they can actually come up with enough reason for players to regularly want to go into these areas and get that loot and find something that is valuable you can't get in Stanton?
Right now, it's going to be rough. I would say the closest thing that we've had to that is, like, let's say that Duster armor that they started dropping recently at rare spots on Hurston,
right?
Where you can carry a few extra mags or whatever. Unless they start really gamifying some other aspects of the game, dropping weapons that, this is a variant of a FS9 and it, has a little bit higher fire rate and a little more spread, and it only drops in this one place. Unless they start doing some things like that as loot drops for that zone, there might not be that much reason other than, hey, I want to go here and get in fights to get this, vehicle that's got a skin. Or not vehicle, weapon that's got a different skin. It comes down to the rewards, and it comes down to how they start tuning these other systems down the line. Are they going to give us variants of armor and weapons that actually function differently? And I don't see any hint on the horizon that that's happening. I think that the ship components are another avenue they could go with that, but we haven't heard anything about it yet. So it very much seems like we're just still in a state where they're building the framework to be able to do these things, but they haven't even begun to talk about when or how they're going to do them.
Yeah, overall, they've chosen a model of kind of, they don't want it to be gamified to the extent of something like Anthem. Maybe, I don't know why that's or Cyberpunk, let's say, like a gun is the exact same gun, but it has a different fire style. But I do wonder how much does that need to change for them to still stick to their model? Can you have a C-54 that maybe is like a special Pyro C-54 that has, I don't know. How much can they change a gun to make it different? And how much work is that for them to come up with the different art or to come up with the different balance on top of that kind of stuff? Because like you said,
it's a lot of work.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, like you said, there needs to be something exclusive about going into these contested zones. I'm not going to go in to get another pistol.
Yeah, no. There could be, weapons that only come from there. That could be a thing. But as far as, tuning or changing the stats on weapons and having versions of weapons that function differently, that's not outside the realm of possibility. And it's not, unrealistic. You could very well have, a firearm with a different kind of gas system that, has a different fire rate. You could have something that, your spread changes a little bit. Maybe you get something that fires more tightly, but the fire rate is lower. There's different ways to balance that stuff out. It wouldn't be totally unreasonable. You don't have to go as far as, well, this C-54 does 22 points of damage and this one does 50. Like, you don't have to go, full RPG route like that to have meaningful and meaningful differences between a few of these weapons that you have a reason to prefer one or the other.
Yeah.
And still have some balance in the game.
Yeah, I agree with you there, because then it leaves open the possibility of, you don't necessarily have to be good at combat to get this. You could be good at exploration, find the right resources, and craft that same gun.
That's a possibility too.
Yeah, because some people don't ever want to. Yeah, some people don't want to have to fight for everything. Some people want to be able to find those things, and I think not necessarily forcing people into contested zones to get that is an option.
Well, again, this comes down to having an economy and an actual market where you can sell goods too. Like, if you don't want to get involved in combat, buy the weapon off someone that does.
True, or kill them for it.
We're kind of half at it. Yeah, or kill them for it.
And then it's combat, I guess.
I mean, there've been discords that have popped up already that are acting as kind of like trade posts, marketplaces where people will go and make these trades in game for however many AUEC for this gun or this set of armor, whatever. Like, we're kind of doing that in the community right now, but that needs to exist in game. there needs to be a market infrastructure in game that lets you handle this stuff and create contracts.
Yeah.
That's one thing actually I've heard from several people as far as economy goes that this game really needs is to expand the custom contract system to where you can, give and receive goods, give and receive delivery of goods over distance, place custom bounties on targets, things like that. A lot of this stuff can be player driven and can work very well if the system is developed for it. And we haven't really seen that develop so far, except for the placeholder of, the medical beacon system, the transport system, which sometimes works. But if that system is expanded, then a lot of these problems solve themselves.
I do really like that for the first time with these persistent hangers, we basically have the ability to put in an order and have someone deliver that order to a secure place that only you can access without you being there. That's kind of nice because, if they're in your party, they can access your hangar. So you could be on the other side of the system. They could go and land in Area 18, leave a bunch of guns in the hangar, take a screenshot of it, send it to you. You send them the money, and that's a done deal. And it feels like it's almost a player trading system at that point. There's just
almost.
We just need I just need a little bit more. Yeah. But they did show the recent FPS team. They showed, we have some pyro specific weapons. We've got the Volt weapons, which I'm sure will just be loot. They're definitely creating things that we can find out there that are unique. It's just a matter of how fast that's going to come. And I hope with Squadron 42 wrapping up, we can see more of that kind of stuff getting introduced into the PU.
I think so. I think a huge component of this is development, and the direction of development needs to start taking a hard look at other games and how they've handled things. There's a lot of wheel reinvention that is going on at CIG and has been for years, and these wheels are never coming out round. Never. It's almost discouraging the number of times that we've seen a system that, like you said, and I've said this before, gets delivered 95% of the way, and they leave out the key 5% of it, the little bit of extra distance they needed to go to really have that feature working and not defeating its own purpose. A lot of games have gotten a lot of this stuff right over the years, and they really need to get out there, look around, and take notice of that, and be willing to recreate something that works very well somewhere else. We don't have to have everything made custom, fresh, and tailored for this game when we don't even really know what the full game looks like, because a lot of these systems are coming in, half-baked. Yeah, I think they need to start taking some pages out of other people's books.
One of the things that they talked about in that regard was the virtual AI system, how it kind of replicated what we saw in Shadow of Mordor, where the AI could kind of remember you or come back across you. And I hope that we still get that. But I do wonder how much of the reinventing they have to do to make that happen, since whatever it is they did for that Shadow of Mordor game is, from what I've heard, very tightly held. Like, ain't nobody going to use that. And that's why we don't really see games that do stuff like that.
Yeah.
We talked a bit about the contested zones. Overall, what's your feeling on them?
I don't think it's a bad thing. I think it's, a drop in a bucket of many more features. I think it's a cool thing to have. I'll be playing with it, I'm sure. And I think it's got plenty of potential for the kind of rewards you can get from it. I don't disagree with having it at all. I think if they want to, pack more activities into the game, that's fine. I do think it's kind of, I think their mileage is going to vary as far as how people see it and how they take advantage of it and for how long they play it. Jumptown is a perfect example of this too. They gamified Jumptown, which was basically originated as a bug. And now every couple of weeks they're putting out a Jumptown event, and at this point people are just like, I don't care anymore, it's old news.
Yeah.
So they're going to get limited mileage from, these 1Z, 2Z, little combat features like this, when what we really need, again, beating on the same drum, is a working economy that allows for an organic open world sandbox experience where the players are actually driving everything because they've got the tools to do so.
That's true. I feel like this comes off a little bit more like Ghost Hollow or Correa, because it's just always running, which I do like. This is another thing that, you can jump into the game at any point and say, okay, I have a reason to go to this place, and I know I'm going to get some gameplay out of it. There's really not that much of those types of things in this game yet. Because even if you wanted to go to like a bunker or something, I guess the bunkers do kind of work as that, but you're always going to be getting a crime stat if you're doing it at a bunker. Really, the only places I feel like we get that are the Ghost Hollow, the Correa, and I feel like I might be missing one.
And for that to work at a place like Ghost Hollow is a great example, by the way. For that to really work at Ghost Hollow, you have to go and take down the comm array. Right now, the comm arrays aren't working. They're broken 90% of the time, so you can't bring that down. Ghost Hollow itself, its terminals aren't working. And this is the story of all these little onesie, twosie combat feature things that they put in there to kind of keep things moving and alive in the meantime. This is where I say their mileage is going to be falling short on, you know, the return they get from putting that work in. It's nice that they're putting that in and doing something, but the lack of support afterwards also kills it. We can't do Ghost Hollow right now because the comm arrays are broken and the Ghost Hollow event itself is broken. Okay, so all that work that they did putting Ghost Hollow in is just, it doesn't matter right now because it's been left unsupported and they're on to the next thing. That's a methodology that needs to change. That's a mindset over there that needs to change. Is we can't just keep dumping these things into the game and then failing to support them. So Ghost Hollow exists. That's great. Nobody can use it. What good did it do?
I think that's a big part of the problem of putting in alpha implementations in a game that people aren't really playing as an alpha anymore. They can't just put stuff in to test and make sure that kind of model of thing can function in the game and then leaving it, right? This is like what they did with docking. It's what they did with names on ships. They put it in, they knew it worked, and then they completely left it, and there was really not much maintenance. And I feel like we have gotten to a point where people are playing this game not as an alpha. And yeah, they can still keep calling it alpha, but it doesn't matter if that's how people are playing it.
I feel there's a certain number of years, a threshold that you cross where you're not allowed to call it an alpha anymore. Honestly, like it doesn't deserve the name at this point. They've definitely pushed it.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just a matter of them getting a feature in and having it working. The problem is they get most of these features in. Again, like I said, 95% of the way, drop the ball at the 5-yard line. And they don't complete it, and they don't 100% make sure that it's bulletproof. And then starts to gradually break down over time and doesn't get revisited. Yeah, docking doesn't work anymore. Ghost Hollow doesn't work anymore. Those things need to be addressed. But you know, it's a problem in the ideology of which is, you know, they're kind of on to the next thing. And you know, I think it's absolutely fair. You said also, you know, people aren't playing it as an alpha anymore. No, why should they be? Have you seen the YouTube ads that this is, you know, that the game is pushing right now? There are official Star Citizen playable now ads, and have been for a while, but like they have really been pushing it lately, and they have really been driving a lot of new player adoption. Why would anybody play it like an alpha? It's being advertised like it's, you know, the second coming.
The trailers have
what could anyone expect? The little 60-second pop-up that you get when you hit play that just says, oh, by the way, it's an alpha, that's supposed to like just cover you and absolve everything? No. You built you painted a picture in everyone's mind of what this game is and how it's supposed to play. And when they get in there and your things aren't working because you didn't complete them all the way, you didn't bulletproof your development, you didn't actually really QA it with people that understand the game and how the game is played by the player, what can you expect? What should anyone be expected to, you know, how should they be expected to act and play the game and set their expectations?
Their patch trailers have always been very kind to the gameplay in the way they display it. But this 323 patch trailer and the release materials with it, the promo materials, the key art, all definitely has a different flavor of marketing to it. Something that they have certainly stepped up to look higher quality and feel more like almost a movie trailer, just for lack of a better term, just a very high production value sort of display of the game as opposed to just putting a bunch of gameplay segments together to some music. And that seems like a conscious shift on their part that I think maybe came a year too early.
Yeah, it's something I don't begrudge them that. I don't begrudge them, you know, advertising the game and making it look good, but you got to do the work behind it. Yeah. Like it's got to be there. And yeah, they absolutely did start pushing things like that too early. Refresh my memory, was 323 trailer, was that the one with the Hull C? And the whole
no, the 323 trailer was the one where they start with the customization of that woman, and then she's in the forest, she gets on the pulse, she drives into the distribution center.
Oh, right, yes.
It plays out very much like they always had. The ship trailers were always like that, which, you know, they say that it's like a trailer for in the actual in-game universe and all that kind of stuff. But the playable now, the patch trailers, that felt like a shift to me. And
yeah, definitely.
Yeah, I think they could have waited until stability was better before putting out quite in your face trailers like that.
Yeah.
To wrap things up, let's talk about the asteroid bases. That was the other part of ISC yesterday. Another thing that's coming into Pyro. How does that fit in the game for you? What do you think of that?
It sounds like kind of a Pyro extension of basically the bunker system that we've got in Stanton right now. The way they described it is, you know, having these spots that are, you know, all over the place, procedurally generated, except that, you know, there's multiple entrances and a little more complexity to the thing. It sounds like they kind of stepped up to a different tech level as far as how they're building those and creating them in the game. But it sounds to me like kind of a glorified next step on the same kind of bunker gameplay loops where you go and you get yourself a bunker mission, you go into the bunker, do the mission, look around for loot, and leave. I very much expect to be playing it like that. Now, if they add something to it to where you could run into someone at one of these bunkers, I think that would be, there's probably opportunity for that. I think it'd be kind of cool. That's something that we kind of already caused to happen in Stanton itself, because you can warp to any of those bunker locations you want. So it's going to kind of depend on how accessible those locations are.
Yeah.
If you can just warp to any of the asteroid bases because they're on your map, then yeah, you're going to have players like me going around to these locations, hunting other players that are stopped there, you know, see their ship parked, either wait outside for them or just pop it and go in after them. It'll be the same thing that we see at bunkers. But if they're hidden, if they're, you know, only generated or only accessible when you can warp to them as part of a mission, then that probably actually creates a little bit of a niche in Pyro where someone can play relatively safely. And so you've got a situation where, you know, maybe it is a little more accessible to the PvE or non-combat players than we originally thought.
I do wonder how, technically speaking, is it any different from a small space station? Which I don't think it is. Right?
It doesn't seem to be. It doesn't seem to be like a space station at all. Like what they showcased there was parking outside and EVAing in. It looks very much like a kind of a derelict settlement sort of thing.
Yeah.
So I don't think we'd be expecting like station services, like a landing pad or anything.
No. Just in the sense of like what it represents. Like it's an asteroid base, right? It's a base inside of an asteroid. But if you took the asteroid away, would it be any different?
Oh, I got you. They did say that they were using the components of their actual space station builds. So right. Yeah, probably not that different at all.
I wonder if they're gonna try and differentiate that in some way. I do understand, you know, this makes for easy in fiction excuses for small points of interest in space. It's not like they don't have to explain, oh, there was some big company that made these space stations all over the place. It's just like, oh, these are some small groups of people that hollowed out an asteroid. I get that, but I do wonder from the gameplay aspect how different it would be from just like a small, non-accessible space station that we could enter.
Yeah, possibility, and maybe something that one day we'll be able to establish ourselves in the same way that we'll have the player bases on the ground.
Yeah,
I could see something like that.
That would be very cool. But yeah, probably just holding a similar place as the smaller points of interest. I do enjoy more variety in points of interest, I think. Even if they are running the same missions that you might be able to get from an outpost down on the planet, it's, you know, it's different scenery. You've got the complications of the EVA. Maybe, actually, now that I think of it, maybe they can play more with venting segments of this space, you know, having some of them be 0G, some of them not have heat, that kind of stuff.
Right. I believe that's part of the engineering system that they're working on, isn't it?
Right. Yeah. And they were very mum about just how much resource management is in these places, because they were like, yeah, you're gonna use the security cards to change power and open doors in the contested zones. But I'm like, is that actually tied into a resource system, or is it just a button press that does something in the game?
Right. Yeah, it's hard to know.
They didn't really get into that. Ultimately, though, I think Pyro seems to be shaping up to be possibly a different experience from Stanton, like actual fundamentally besides just the difference in laws, but we'll just have to wait to see more of what they talk about in ISC the next few weeks, because I know they have a social segment coming up that they'll talk about that, and maybe their engineering ISC, they'll also talk about that. But in terms of the wrapping it back around really to the topic of the whole show, the new player experience, progressing from just getting your feet on the ground in the game to eventually exploring and getting more out into the game. Do you think that Pyro is in a place where somebody could start exploring into their, say, in their first week of gameplay? Or do you think they're setting this up to be like, you stay in Stanton for a while and then you can maybe venture out into Pyro later?
I think the opportunity is certainly there. It depends on the player. You have a lot of players that are going to kind of try and stay in the safe ground where they begin and, you know, learn and chip away at the game slowly. And then you have some people that are like, I want to get into the most trouble I possibly can right out of the gate. And surprisingly, I'm not really the second type of player most of the time when I go into something new. So, like for myself, Pyro probably wouldn't be the very first thing I did if I got into this game for the first time, but I would certainly be drawn to it. And I think it's going to depend on your mindset and your understanding of what the game is, and having a good representation of what you're getting into in an open world sandbox PvP enabled game is really important. That is looping back to the new player experience. I think that is one thing that is not very clear and not very well understood among new players, and it's not presented very well for new players to gain that perspective. As I get into, you know, creating my own, you know, new player guide, that's one thing that I'm going to do that I think is going to set mine apart from a lot of the guides out there, is building that expectation and that mindset right out of the gate that, hey, you're in an open world. Someone can mess with you anytime for any reason. It doesn't matter what that is. It's not reportable. There's nothing wrong with it. They just chose to do that. Here are the things you can start thinking about to protect yourself as you go through, because this is the world you're joining. And if we do need a shift in the community, I think, to that kind of understanding that that's the game this is, and have that kind of mindset applied to it.
Definitely. That's good messaging. Yeah, I think that's a really good thing, that the way that you described it, as this is a route somebody can take early on if that's what they're looking for, and it's also something that you can hold off and almost not necessarily treat as end game, but maybe treat as more advanced gameplay. That the more they can diversify the choices players can take in that first 2 to 4 weeks of the game, the more interesting this game becomes, the more varied the gameplay stories and the videos coming out of it and the orgs that are being created, all of that stuff starts to become more specialized. And I think that's pretty healthy for the game. Yes, absolutely agreed. All right, man. Well, thank you for this talk. This is a really good one. I have a lot to... Man, I got to go watch that ISC episode again, because the thing you brought up about the cargo stuff is good. And just in general, there's a lot to think about how this impacts players when they're first starting out in the game. Thank you so much, though, for joining me for this. University of Stanton, everybody, Durgan being the host, and the professor, or maybe the provocateur, whatever you call it when you attack people. Yeah. You're doing both of them. I'll teach you one way or the other. Let people know where they can find those lessons, or danger, whatever it is. Yeah, it's going to be YouTube, University of Stanton. Just look it up by that name, and it'll pop right up. There's a Stanton University. That's not me. Yeah, I saw that. I saw that channel. I picked the name very carefully. I went and did the search first. But yeah, we've got... Were you thinking Stanton University at first? Yeah, originally I was, and I looked at it. I was okay. That's an actual school thing. I'm gonna just deconflict that out of the gate. We'll go with UOS. That'll work. Good call. Yeah, University of Stanton on YouTube. There will be a new player series. This was actually voted by the community recently to do a flight basics guide next. So I decided, okay, we're gonna go ahead and start doing the new player guide in its entirety, and we're gonna start with game settings, flight basics right out of the gate. And so that's what's going to be coming next. And now that 324 is on PTU, it's going to be ready for 324. Sweet. Well, thank you so much for helping the community out, for your content, and for coming on this show to talk about this stuff. Fantastic talk. Can't wait for the next one. Yeah, man, it's been great talking to you. Appreciate you bringing me on. And thank you everybody for listening or watching. If you're on YouTube and you don't like the ads, you know what I say. Our audio platforms are ad-free, supported by our supporters, who are also here in chat for the live show. If you want to sign up on Patreon or join as a YouTube channel member, everybody gets access to the podcast live to come in and chat with us, listen to a little bit of our gossip before and after the show. You get exclusive videos every month, and possibly your referral code and our referral code randomizer under every video. So thank you again for watching. Thank you all who are supporting. I hope you got some good news from this one, and I will see you all next week.